Welcome to my budget deck channel, where I try to make decks as cheap and playable as possible. So if this is something you'd be interested in, then why not subscribe? So you might as well call this my 1000 subscriber special. Again, very much thanks to all of you, because this is something I actually didn't think I was ever going to achieve. And yeah, for lots of YouTubers this might not be a crazy number or anything, but for me it does actually mean quite a lot. So thank you every single one of you. And now to the actual, well, Blue Eyes in the room. I have revisited Blue Eyes because actually a few new cards have been released, well, already a few months or a year ago, whenever that was. But I actually thought, why not make a deck that is very beginner friendly, that includes lots of the, well, summoning mechanics, so you can actually learn the game while playing this deck, while playing a deck that you might be familiar from the anime. Maybe you want to get back into Yu-Gi-Oh! Because you played as a kid and you felt like an online simulator is a bit better than actually playing in real life, because real life can be quite terrifying if you don't know the rules, if you don't really know what's good or what's not, and if you also have to interact with other human beings. This can be specifically scary for some people. So maybe you want to start out with playing an online simulator and you do not want to instantly invest super many crafting materials into, like, well, a deck that might not be the best deck, but at least a deck that kind of teaches you the game and that actually, well, it does what it does. Like, it can win some games. It isn't super amazing or anything, but that's what I mean. Blue Eyes isn't either. And if you've looked up other Blue Eyes deck profiles, you will have noticed if you want to be playing Blue Eyes even remotely competitive in Master Duel, then you have to spend a lot of these crafting materials, a lot of gems to open packs. Lots of the Blue Eyes cards aren't actually even in any of the secret packs. You actually have to open the master packs for them and so on. So this is a cheap way of trying out, is the Blue Eyes playstyle something I want to be doing? Is Yu-Gi-Oh! Master Duel something I want to be doing? And if so, then let's start off with the list and talk about why I run certain cards, what they do, and why I think they should be in this deck. To Blue Eyes, funny enough, I will be clicking on this right now, how to obtain, very, very important in a budget deck, because this card not only comes in the legacy pack, but I'm telling you now, I have opened thousands of these and I have not got a single Blue Eyes from that. So it's a bit iffy, but they also come in the initial distribution structure deck, Power of the Dragon. I think it's one of the three that you can choose at the start. If you didn't choose the Blue Eyes deck, then honestly, what are you looking for a Blue Eyes deck profile? Because I thought most people that would be looking for this already have got the Dragon starter deck. But even if you did, even if you didn't, it doesn't matter, because if you play the game for long enough, you will get the structure deck eventually. In one of the, well, not daily missions, but lifetime missions. The thing is, it takes a while to get all of them, and you already will have to be playing some other decks in the meantime. So if you did choose this, then they come for free. If not, you would have to craft them, and that would be somewhat of a waste of material, because obviously, well, it is what it is. You actually can get those for free. Next up, Maiden with Eyes of Blue at 2. I tried it out at 3. At 3, it's not terrible. The effect is a bit outdated. Like back in the day when this card came out, it was actually reasonably strong. Nowadays, there's so many different effects of getting rid of this card, but one of the new cards actually makes this card a tiny bit better, because now it's not so easy to destroy it by card effect. So this is already off board, and if you target this card, or if your opponent runs into this card by battle, then you can trigger the effect and you can special summon one Blue Eyes White Dragon from your hand, deck, or graveyard. Sadly, the effect is only a Blue Eyes White Dragon and not Blue Eyes Monster, which some of the other ones are, funny enough. So this can be a bit problematic from time to time, but you can trigger it with your own effects, you can trigger it with cards I'll be talking about in a second, and you can actually just leave it on board and hope your opponent, especially in the grind game, won't have an answer to it other than just run it over by battle or target it with the card effect, and then you get one of your Blue Eyes. And at this point, it doesn't really matter where it is. It doesn't have to be in deck, it doesn't have to be in your hand or whatever. It can be from anywhere but the banished zone, which can be problematic from time to time, especially in the current meta. But other than that, this card does its job. It doesn't do it amazingly, but it does its job, and it is a tuner. If you still remember what tuners are, the whole Synchro shenanigans, I'll be talking about this in a minute as well. We have the other level 1, one of the level 1 brigade that Blue Eyes got at one point, Protector with Eyes of Blue. I decided to go for it at 1 because he can technically somewhat search it, and it's quite nice if you have a Blue Eyes monster stuck in your hand. And also this card can trigger the effect of our Maiden with Eyes of Blue as well, which is quite nice. Also, you can special summon one of the other tuner monsters from your hand, which can be coming in somewhat handy as well, because sometimes you want to get rid of certain other cards in your hand, and that is the way to do this. So if you are bricked with one of the brick eyes in your hand, then you can actually get rid of that with this one. One of the more important ones, Sage with Eyes of Blue, very, very important. Also Spellcaster, Tuner, level 1 light monster. When this card is normal summoned, you can add 1 level light tuner monster from your deck to your hand. Most of the time, what you want to be adding is the White Stone of Ancients, because you can send this card to the graveyard with multiple different effects, but you mainly play this card for its second effect, and that is you can discard this card, then target one effect monster you control, which is very nice if you control this one, because then you can trigger the effect of Maiden as well, then get 2 blue eyes monsters out, well, 1 blue eyes white dragon and 1 blue eyes monster, and then you can send it to the graveyard and special summon 1 blue ice monster from your deck. See, it's not blue ice white dragon, it's actually a blue ice monster, and why this is important you will see soon enough, because there are multiple different level 8 dragon monsters that are blue eyes these days, and they are not blue eyes white dragon, so this is very helpful in getting those ones out. And technically sometimes you can be adding this card to your hand. Why this is important in a minute. We run 2 Masters of Eyes of Blue, very good in the grind game. You can add 1 light level 1 tuner monster in your graveyard back to your hand, very, very important, because you have lots of them. And then technically sometimes you can go into the Sage combo again if you already used it before and have it in your graveyards, and then you can tribute this card again, well, send this card to the graveyard with the effect of Sage, and then summon another blue eyes if you still have one in deck. That can be problematic from time to time, not all the time, but you won't always have one in your deck left at the end of the game. But also this card has a neat effect in your graveyard. Yes, effects in graveyard are also a thing now. You can shuffle this card back from your graveyard into the deck and then target 1 effect monster you control, send it to the graveyard, and if you do, special summon 1 blue ice monster from your graveyard, which is quite nice. Other than the send monster, so you can't just recycle it, which sounds a bit iffy, sounds a bit stupid. Why would you do that? But there is 1 blue ice monster that actually has an effect when it's special summoned, and if you would be recycling this, you technically get 2 spell trap banishes, and that can be strong, I guess. So yeah, no recycling for you, no doing the same kind of thing twice, although I'm pretty sure, no, this is actually not once per turn, so it makes sense, that clause. Next up, White Stone of Ancients. This is one of the more important cards in the deck. It's actually, well, I want to say it's quite nice, and it does lots of things, but it also is sometimes a bit bricky. There are cards where you can get this card out of your hand. I'll be talking about what other cards you can be running in this deck. You can already see them on the right hand side of the screen. I will be having a new section where we'll be talking about these cards in particular, what to run, what you could swap out to make this deck a bit more competitive if you want to upgrade eventually. But the most important effect of this card, once per turn during the end phase, if this card is in the graveyard, so also during your opponent's end phase, if it was sent there this turn, important, you can special summon 1 blue ice monster from your deck. Very important, not just blue ice white dragon, but blue ice monster. So hey, there's that. But how do we get this card into the graveyard? Well, there's multiple different ways. We have obviously the way of normal summon it and send it to the graveyard with Sage. Then you get 1 blue ice in the end step and 1 blue ice instantly because of Sage's effect. We have the option of Dragon Shrine, a card that I'll be talking about, but I can send this directly from the deck to the graveyard. We have Performapal Popperup, a card that also can discard it from your hand and then draw new cards. Very important in this specific variant. Usually a card that you don't necessarily want to be running, but we're trying to keep it as cheap as possible, and this is one way of recycling stuff in your hand that you maybe don't want in your hand and drawing into cards that you might do want in your hand. So there's that. And there's a third option, normal summon it and link it off. Link summon, what is this? Well, it's not actually too hard. You can see 1 level 1 monster. So what happens is you send this monster to the graveyard that is mentioned here, and then you can summon this from your extra deck. Well, it doesn't sound complicated because it isn't, and this card can actually come back when you tribute 1 level 1 monster on board, so you can do this relatively often, because if this card is in your graveyard, you can do that multiple times. So we have that, and the other effect, it basically blocks 1 attack, which is also quite nice because you try to stall a little bit. Plus, it's a Karibo variant, so well, doesn't fit into a Kaiba deck, but at least has some nostalgic feel to it. 1 Dragon Spirit of White. If you don't want to invest into this, or you feel like you don't really need it, if you want to keep it super cheap right now, you can also play Blue Eyes Solid Dragon. This takes care of opponents' monster effects, and this takes care of your opponent's spell traps. But I feel like this deck kind of lacks other ways to get rid of spell traps consistently, in a sense. and this one banishes them, which can be very important these days because graveyard effects are a thing, and sometimes you do want to banish stuff. So I like running one of them, but you can also make the deck a tiny bit cheaper and cut this one out and play stuff like Blue Eyes Solid Dragon, or technically even things like Nebula Dragon, although then your Blue Eyes ratio becomes a tiny bit too small. Also, very important to mention, this card is always treated as a Blue Eyes card, even in deck, so you can still summon this one out with stuff like Sage or the effect of the Windstone of Ancients. One of the newer cards, Blue Eyes Abyss Dragon, a card that I didn't run in my last deck profile, very, very nice card. To activate each of this card's effects, you do have to have a Blue Eyes White Dragon on your field or in your graveyard though, so this can be problematic from time to time because you won't always be able to, but this is also a card that as a one-off works because you can easily summon it from the deck, and if it's special summoned you can add one ritual spell, yes, ritual spell or polymerization if you want to, but it's not really necessary in this because it's kind of a bricky and you usually don't want to fusion summon with poly, but technically you could if you want to. And during the end phase, you can add one level 8 or higher dragon monster from your deck to your hand. The cards that you'll be adding from your deck to your hand will be up next, and it is this one and this one. But first, also this card, very neat in the graveyard. You can banish this from the graveyard, and all your level 8 or higher dragon monsters you control gain 1000 attack. Very, very good to actually, well, finish games. And the game will prompt you this. You will see, well, circle around your graveyard, and you can always check what effects you can activate in the graveyard, so it's not that hard to forget this effect in comparison to actual real life play. Blue Eyes Jet Dragon, very, very nice card. It's basically one of the ace monsters of this deck now, and to the artwork, yes, it is the jet that Kaiba usually flies around in, which is kind of hilarious but also a bit weird when it comes to card games. But this card, like every single effect of this card, is very important. Other cards you control cannot be destroyed by your opponent's card effects. Very good. Not only your monsters, but also your back row is protected by this. So in general, very, very strong effect. But this isn't where it stops. You can only use each effect of this one once per turn, obviously, and you can only activate them while Blue Eyes White Dragon is on your field or in your graveyard. This is an important part. And if cards on the field are destroyed by battle or card effects, even your opponent's ones, you can special summon this card from your graveyard if it was there, or from your hand, so this is also good. So even if you add it to your hand with this one, it still gets its effects in hand. All you have to do, obviously, is have a Blue Eyes White Dragon on board or in your graveyard, which usually you kind of want to have anyway. And at the start of damage step, if this card battles, you can target one card your opponent controls, return it to the hand. Very, very strong to get rid of stuff. Works when it's attacking itself and when it's being attacked. So this is actually quite a nice card to be dealing with. And I decided to include the Ritual Blue Eyes in here, the Ritual engine. There's a stronger Blue Eyes Ritual that I'll be talking about, but it's an ultra rare, and I feel like this card at least does its job. It's quite nice. You can ritual summon it with Chaos Form, which you can add to your hand by the effects of this one, so you will actually be able to get to this quite a lot. And this one, my problem with this is it must be ritual summoned, so you can't summon it back from the graveyard using things like Master, sadly. Obviously you can't summon it from deck. That's not how rituals work. Your opponent cannot target this card with card effects. Also, it cannot be destroyed by your opponent's card effects. So they have to basically run it over by battle or use effects that don't destroy and don't target, which there are not that many of, but they do exist. If this card was ritual summoned using Blue Eyes White Dragon, which it will be most of the time, when it declares an attack, you can change the battle positions of as many monsters your opponent controls as possible. And if you do, the attack and defense of those changed monsters become 0 forever, not just for the rest of this turn, forever, and also this turn if this card attacks a defense position monster, inflict piercing battle damage. So either way, you will be dealing 3000 attack damage with this card, and also it is very hard to get rid of, well, reasonably hard to get rid of for a rare card. And yeah, I feel like this justifies running this. Can be nice on the crackback if you already set up your hand with this card beforehand, then you stall your opponent, maybe use some tramp cards so the board doesn't get too excessive, and then you can hopefully kind of finish the game or take even more resources from them. And in the end, even if you don't use these two cards, you can still use them for the discard trap effects. So filling up your hand with cards isn't necessarily too bad either. Plus, the White Stone of Ancients actually has a second effect. You can banish this card from your graveyard, then targets one Blue Eyes monster in your graveyard, add it to your hand. Usually doesn't matter that much unless you draw into this one, and it can actually do stuff. Or if you discard this one with card effects, and then during the next turn you want it back to your hand, so you can banish this one, add the ritual monster back to your hand, and then you can ritual summon it from your hand with this one. So this can be an interesting combo. Another card that you would want to be playing at 2 or 3 at least, But yeah, it is what it is. Budget wise, this one you can send one dragon monster from your deck to the graveyard. Then if it's a normal monster, then you can send one more dragon monster from your deck to the graveyard. So what you can be doing is send one blue eyes white dragon, so you have that in your graveyard, and then send one white stone or one blue eyes jet dragon, so you have them for the next turn. Then you get in the end phase this effect, and the effects of stuff like Blue Eyes Abyss Dragon then proc because you already have this in graveyard, or the same with Jet Dragon. So this is a nice setup. You usually want to be running like 2 or 3 of this because it's very strong. Obviously can't be activated more than once per turn, so you have that issue sometimes. If you run 3 and you have 3 of them in hand, then it's a bit bricky. But I would say at least run 2 of this. Then we have Performapal Popperup, a card that is, it looks a bit more complicated than it is. You can send up to 3 cards from your hand to the graveyard, draw that many cards, then you can special summon whatever it means. You don't play Performapal, so that doesn't matter. The only thing matters, you can get cards into the graveyard, draw new cards, and also you have to watch out if you did not special summon by this effect, which you won't be able to. You can you lose 1000 life points for each card in your hand. So if you have trap cards or certain spell cards that you want to be activating later on, then you can set them so you don't have that many cards in hand, and then you only get like up to 3000 damage usually, which sounds very bad, but it is okay. It's not the worst thing for the fact that it adds some consistency in some form to this deck and gets cards into the graveyard that you don't necessarily need in your hand. For example, if you draw into 2 blue eyes and one of them, you can just send those 3 to the graveyard. You don't need them in your hand anyway, and you want this in your graveyard, and then you draw actually 3 new cards that you can actually use. We have Triple Jack in the hand. This card is, in my opinion, quite underrated for the fact what it is. You can reveal 3 level 1 monsters with different names from your deck. Your opponent adds 1 to their hand. There's not that many Blue Eyes players around, so that actually gives them much of an advantage. Yes, in the mirror match, you wouldn't want your opponent Blue Eyes player to give them Blue Eyes cards. It is what it is though. And then you can add the other one. So usually you'll reveal stuff like this, or this, or this, and definitely this, and each of the 2, whatever your opponent doesn't take, you will add to your hand of those 2 mainly. Unless you already have one of them, then sometimes it can be worth getting this one or this one. Usually your opponent won't take those 2 anyway, and then you can technically start your plays, because if you get this to your hand, you can do normal summon and then link summon and then get your blue eyes play started. And if you have this, then you usually want another monster in hand, so it depends on whatever your opponent lets you have technically, but this can be adding quite some consistency to this deck. This is the ritual spell, searchable by this card, and you can use Blue Eyes White Dragon from your graveyard actually to banish it, and then use that as a material, so you don't actually have to have a level 8 monster in your graveyard. And for this card, you technically, for the second effect, want to be using Blue Eyes White Dragon. This is, by the way, how you lose some blue eyes, because you will banish it and there's not really a way for you to actually get this back. One card that you don't want to be running in a competitive variant, but in this variant it's not terrible and does stuff. You can send 1 blue eyes monster from your hand or deck to the graveyard, and target 1 face up monster on the field. It cannot attack while it is face up on the field, so forever basically, till it leaves the field. And also it's a targeting effect, so you can trigger your own Maiden with this card effect. And the important thing of this card is it sends Jet Dragon to the graveyard, which is quite nice. Or if you already have Jet Dragon and miss 1 blue eyes, then it does that. Successor Soul kind of somewhat well, special summons a blue eyes white dragon from your deck if you still have one, and sends one of your opponent's monsters to the graveyard. It has to be an effect monster though, and then you can special summon the blue eyes, and you have to tribute 1 effect monster. So sometimes, even especially going second, you can actually like normal summon this, then use the effect of Successor Soul, special summon 1 blue eyes, and get these cards to the graveyard. Also, it's not terrible going first because you can set it, since it's a quick play. Not a quick play, ultimate fusion. You can, during the main phase, sadly, not during the battle phase, fusion summon 1 fusion monster from extra deck that mentions Blue Eyes White Dragon. We have 1 of them, but you can be playing more like this one, for example, or obviously ultimate, but then you would have to run 3 blue eyes. And then you can, by shuffling the fusion materials listed on it from your hand, field, or graveyard into the deck, and you can destroy face-up cards your opponent controls up to the number of Blue Eyes White Dragon and Ultimate Dragon on the field used as material. So maximum of 2, but usually it's more like 0 to 1. Still, it's quite nice. The monster you get out with this card is quite good. It's a quick spell, so you can use it actually as a disruption, especially if you get Blue Eyes White Dragon out. The only problem that you have to remember is if you shuffle Blue Eyes White Dragon back to the deck, then your effect of Jet Dragon becomes, well, kind of dead, because then you don't have 1 Blue Eyes White Dragon anymore on board. And since this card isn't treated as Blue Eyes White Dragon, yeah, can be a bit problematic. Torrential Tribute, an old friend, an old card that you might remember, very, very important in this deck because it shunts down your opponent's plays, plus it can trigger stuff like Blue-Eyes Jet Dragon, very, very important, and it slows down the game pace, and that is exactly where you want to be. Raigeki Break also triggers your Blue-Eyes Jet Dragon, also gets rid of stuff in your hand that you don't need, can discard White Stone of Ancient during your opponent's turn if you had 2 in your hand, so this can be nice. Same for this one, but it banishes stuff, so it doesn't trigger this one, but sometimes you want to banish things so they don't come back. We have one, the ultimate creature of destruction, very, very nice, protects your blue-eyes monsters, makes them unaffected by card effects and cannot be destroyed by battle. Also, any opponent's monster is battle destroyed at the end of damage step, and while this card is in your graveyard and you normal summon or special summon a blue-eyes white dragon, excuse me, you can set this card by banish it when it leaves the field. Very, very nice. This card can be recycled, so it's quite nice. You'd think, oh, don't I want to be playing more of this card? Not really, because the thing is, if you have 2 of this in your starting hand, you basically have 1 dead card already. It does nothing then, and if you then don't even get 1 blue eyes monster on board for some reason, then you just lose out on so much card advantage. So I feel like at 1 this card is fine, but more than 1 seems very bricky. Divine Wrath, basically the same as the other ones. Monster effects are annoying. You can also run the one that does spell effects, also one of those old cards. You can discard 1 card and negate the activation and destroy that monster, very important in today's meta. For the extra deck, we have Blue Eyes Tyrant Dragon, requires 1 Blue Eyes White Dragon plus 1 Dragon monster, very easy to do usually. This card basically sets this up already because you get Blue Eyes White Dragon to the graveyard plus White Stone, and then you have the materials for this one already, so this is why those 2 cards harmonize quite well together. And this one's effect is very, very nice to clear your opponent's board because you can actually, well, it's unaffected by trap cards, so that's quite nice, and it can attack all your monsters your opponent controls once each. This is nice, and in this specific deck that runs quite a lot of trap cards, once per turn at the end of this damage step, if this card battles, you can target 1 trap card in your graveyard, set it to your spell trap zone. So this card, very nice, but lacks protection, still counts as a blue eyes card, so there are ways to actually summon it back from the graveyard because it only must first be fusion summoned. So once you've done that and it lands in the graveyard, you can get it back with Master with Eyes of Blue. We have this card because this card can be special summoned off the effect of Spirit Dragon. We have these as level 9 synchros because they do some stuff. You can read them in your spare time if you want. They're not worth to really go into most of the time, but this one can become a monster. If you need to beat a 3000 attack point monster, then this is something you can go into. This one gets you other level 9s back and can then go into rank 9, which is also a nice mechanic that this deck can be doing. Blue Eyes Spirit Dragon is also a Blue Eyes card, so it's quite important because you can summon it back with Master of Eyes of Blue. You can stop your opponent from summoning 2 or more monsters at the same time, well, technically both players, but our deck doesn't do that. And once per turn, when an effect or card is activated in the graveyard, very important at the moment, then you can negate this and you can tag this out into 1 Light Dragon synchro monster, but it gets destroyed during the end phase. What you usually want to be tagging out into is Azure Eyes Silver Dragon, for example, very, very important card. Can actually summon normal monsters back there in your graveyard, so quite important because this card is also treated as a normal monster in hand or graveyard, so this is the way how you can get rid of spell traps most importantly. But yeah, you'd have to run this card. Next are super rare, you don't need it as much, but if you have it, if you want to be running it, you could. For the extra deck, this is just rank 1 stuff because technically you can get 2 level 1 monsters on board. This is if you have 2 level 8 dragon type monsters on board. The effects can be nice. This is how you get rid of stuff in your hand. If you draw into this one, for example, can be quite helpful. Then we have this one. This helps you go into this or this one. The effects are quite strong from time to time, but it's not super necessary. Read them at your choice. These are not part of the core gameplay, but they can come up randomly. And then we have those 2 that you can summon on top of this one. You'll be prompted by the extra deck if you can do this, so you can always think about it in game. We have this card, very, very important. We have this, if you get this card banished from time to time, then you might want a second card that can send your stones and stuff to the graveyard, and this is summoned by 1 normal summoned or set monster, cannot be link summoned except during main phase 2, so it only works later stages of the game. Is because turn 1 you don't have a main phase 2, so keep that one in mind. That's why this one is a bit better, and we do have to actually run this because this deck wants to go first. And we have another link monster, just basically to get rid of certain opponent stuff when they don't usually watch out where they place their monsters, and then you can actually get rid of certain things, swap them a bit like creature swap. This is well, the card by card. I will be talking about what kind of cards from the list on the right hand side you can be playing and what kind of cards you can instantly put in to make the deck a tiny bit better and improve the deck over time. And then there's some other playstyles where the deck kind of changes a lot, but you can also be doing that one. Alright, how could we make this deck a tiny bit better if we just have a few more ultra rare or super rare points that we could invest, or some cards that we might have already gotten and it might be able to add into this deck? Well, first of all, we could be playing stuff like the White Stone of Legends, especially if we go in for things like Dictator of D, which you could be playing like at 1. Technically, you could be playing at 2 and you cut some of this, then you run some of this. And then you could also be playing, well, you could cut these ones and play one of this, and then you can be playing like cutting some of the Performapal Popperup completely, play 1 card of Consonance. This card you can discard one Dragon Tuner and send and draw 2 cards, which is quite nice. So that works. You can easily still search these, especially if you run this one and this one in combination, then you will always have 1 in hand with Jack in the hand. So cards of Consonance will not be dead most of the time in your hand. Other things you can be going for if you want to increase the power level a tiny bit is you cut this one and you play this one, for example. We can add one of the fusions and possibly cut things like the Giant Castle. It's not that important in this deck. That is also something that works pretty well. We would be cutting this one and adding some Asia Eye Silver Dragon to the deck, because then the whole engine with Blue Eye Spirit Dragon works a bit better, because you can tack this one out and then go into this one, and if this one is special summon until the end of the next turn, neither player can target dragon monsters you currently control so if you play new ones, that effect doesn't apply anymore. With card effects also, they cannot be destroyed by card effects. Not only does this work as protection from your opponent's stuff, it also protects yourself from your own Torrential Tribute, which stuff like Blue Eyes Jet Dragon doesn't, because that only means other cards you control cannot be destroyed by your opponent's card effects. So these two don't synergize as well as, for example, if you would go into this one and then doing your standby phase, you can target 1 normal monster in the graveyard, special summon it. Keep in mind this card is treated as a normal monster while in hand or graveyard, so it actually works with that one as well. You could be also running like 1 trade-in, especially if you run stuff like the White Stone of Legend, then 1 trade-in would also not be completely terrible. What we could also be doing is crank this one up to 2, cut one of them. Since we only be running 1 Maiden now, you can cut another one of this one, run 1 trade-in, and so on. If you have stuff like hand traps, usually 1 Ash Blossom is in the Master Pack bundle, so if you're like an absolute beginner, I would definitely recommend doing this. If you already have them, then you can replace certain things in your deck, for example like this, because your discards don't become too crazy anymore, because you have more consistency, more discards through other ways. So you can be running like an Ash Blossom here and there, these kind of things. Dictator of D becomes really good in combination with the White Stone of Legend, because this one actually mentions Blue Eyes White Dragon, because with Dictator of D you can actually send 1 Blue Eyes White Dragon from your hand or deck to the graveyard, special summon this card, and you can discard 1 Blue Eyes White Dragon or 1 card that mentions it and target 1 Blue Eyes monster in the graveyard, any Blue Eyes. So this is quite nice in combination with things like Dragon Shrine. Then you can send that one to the graveyard and actually get the effect off. The problem is though, only this one actually mentions Blue Eyes White Dragon. This card only says Blue Eyes monster, so it doesn't work with this. It's a bit annoying. I wish it would have just said like 1 Blue Eyes card, but it doesn't, so there's that. This one actually same issue with this one same issue, because it doesn't say Blue Eyes White Dragon. So you have a bit of problems from time to time, because you don't have that many cards that actually mention Blue Eyes White Dragon, and you don't really want to be sending things like Ultimate Fusion to the graveyard. But what you could also be doing is, if you run a multiple of Dragon Shrine, you could then cut stuff like Successor Soul and actually play like Ultimate Fusion at 2, because then this card comes up more often, because you actually have the instant set up more often. You have more ways of going into this one. It's not too bad. You can keep going and keep going and keep adding things that work out, especially if you run multiple of this one. What you could also be doing is you could cut one of these cards, for example, then run stuff like Bingo Machine, because Bingo Machine searches you things. You could also be cutting one of this and one of this possibly, or some of the Torrential Tributes, then play things like True Light, because True Light actually searches you certain cards and it protects your Blue Eyes monsters. Well, your Blue Eyes White Dragon, sadly, not all Blue Eyes monsters, in some shape or form. Sadly, this card doesn't actually work with Blue Eyes monsters, only with Blue Eyes White Dragon. So this is why I'm not the biggest fan of this card personally. Like, I wouldn't be playing it. I would preferably play one of this and then keep some of these cards alive, because the discard is still good in the deck and banishing cards are still fine. This can obviously conflict with some of your stuff as well, but it's not as bad as some other things. You could also be cutting one master with Eyes of Blue just for the late game things, and be running things like Nebula Dragon if you want to be going into certain things like this. I would also recommend play one of the Numeron Dragon, because this is an easy way to finish games. What you could be cutting is those two and be playing like either this or this, and you can also think about playing Zeus, because this card is very, very, very strong when it comes to using Xyz monsters in your deck, and you can easily do that one as well. There's plenty of stuff that you can be doing. You can cut some of these cards and add things like the Return of the Dragon Lords to get stuff back from your graveyard, and the more ways you have to send stuff into the graveyard, the better it will be in the end. You can also add things like Called by the Grave in comparison to one of these cards maybe, or this one, whatever you want, because this one stops hand traps that your opponent uses. Funny enough, they're called hand traps. If you're not that familiar with Yu-Gi-Oh yet, these cards that activate in hand are called hand traps. They're not actually trap cards. They're basically trap monsters, but not the trap cards that you can summon as monsters, but monster cards that kind of work from your hand and like a trap. Then in a sense it's a whole different thing, but they are called hand traps in case you didn't know. If you didn't know, these three will probably be the most important ones at the moment. Dimension Shifter as well, but that would hurt your own deck too much to consider in Blue Eyes in my opinion. And so like this, it's still not the best competitive deck, but you add a bit of consistency, you add a bit of power levels to it, and you don't add too many ultra rares, too many super rares. You just keep adding certain pieces like this one. This can OTK because it can actually get up to 9,000 attack. So if your opponent's field is somewhat open, or they don't have they have one monster on board that isn't crazy when it comes to attack points, you can summon this card off of the effect of this one. If you wonder how you can go into this, it is by the effect of this one. You don't actually have to care about what this card says on here. So there's that. And yes, things like this keep you in game a bit longer. Things like this just give you more options, especially if you run more ultimate fusions. Running more Dragon Shrines sets up your combos better, works better in terms of ultimate fusion. And this one is a card that can easily summon this one on one of the dragon monsters in your hand that you might have added by White Stone of Legend, or at one point in the later stages off from your graveyard with the second effect of the White Stone of Ancients. And then you can summon this one and the other level 8 dragon monster in your hand. And then you can go into stuff like this one, for example, if you have it first turn, and so on and so on. But you have to watch out, because for the rest of this turn you cannot normal or special summon monsters except light or dark dragon monsters, which is fine because this is a light dragon and this is a dark dragon, so this still works. So if you want to go for this combo, that is fine, and so on. There's a more competitive Blue Eyes variant, but it isn't really pure Blue Eyes anymore at this point. It's more like, well, you run stuff like Branded Fusion and all the branded cards. You have to play Fallen of Albas, but there's plenty of deck profiles on this one on YouTube, so don't you worry about this one just now. What you still could be playing if you want to be, you can cut some of these cards, and then play 2 or 3 Melody of Awakening Dragon, and play like 1 or 2 of Blue as alternative White Dragon. But these only really work out if you do run these Xyz cards, because otherwise you just have this card on board. Unless you go second, it's one body on board that does absolutely nothing. It does work out in some ways though, because this card's name becomes Blue Eyes White Dragon while on the field or the graveyard, so this actually adds a bit of, well, consistency to the whole Dictator of D thing as well. And you can recycle this card easily by just adding it back to your hand with the stone as well, and so on and so on and so on. There's lots of ways to keep your plays floating, but like I said, you can bit by bit chop certain cards off and add certain other ones in. You always want to be thinking about, okay, the card that I'm replacing, what does this do for the deck? So I should replace it with a card that does something similar, because otherwise you might be adding some power level cards, but your consistency then is absolutely bad and you will not be able to have playable hands like 4 out of 10 times. That's also not something that adds to the overall thing. So kind of keep in mind, if I take out consistency cards, I kind of want to fill that spot with consistency cards. And if I take out power cards, then I might want to fill in, well, even stronger power cards, and so on and so on. It's like the same fuck. If you take out some traps, you kind of want to be adding cards that do round about the same, or at least some engine that gets you into stuff that does the same. For example, if you cut this traps but run 3 of Nebula Dragon and then run stuff like this, you still have a disruption during your opponent's turn. You don't necessarily need to fill trap slots with traps, but you want to be filling these slots with cards that get you into things that disrupt your opponent, for example. Because it doesn't help if you just flood your board with Blue Eyes monsters, but they all do nothing on board, for example. That's like basic game design, but you obviously want to make sure your deck can do lots of different things and excel at certain things. Like either you have a deck that does one thing very, very, very well, or you have a deck that does most things like averagely well, so you can adapt your playstyle to what your opponent is doing and hopefully either outgrind them or just catch them off guard in one of their deck's weaknesses, for example. These are some cards that you can be considering, and now let's go to the commented replay section. The first replay is against a Sylvan deck. You can see it's 60 cards, it's lots of mill stuff, lots of self-mill, so they can actually get effects off because the deck wants to be doing this one. And looking at our starting hand, we do have multiple options here. We have one card that can send Jet Dragon to the graveyard, so that's quite nice. Also can stop the opponent from attacking with one monster, which depending on if they run one bigger boss monster that can still be affected, or if they run lots of smaller monsters that just beat you down, this card can be coming in handy, especially if only to send Jet Dragon to the graveyard is still fine. Then we have one White Stone of Ancients. We can now decide what we want to be doing. We won't be able to get this card to the graveyard during our turn, so well, we can if we actually go into the Linkuriboh play, which is also an option, but we also could keep it on board and then use it with Successor Soul, or keep it in hand to discard it off of Dinomischus and get the effect of during the opponent's turn. But I think what I'm going to be doing is, because you kind of want stuff already set up for your opponent's turn, and I don't have a different normal summon, I just go into this, link it off into Linkuriboh, and then set these 3 cards. I still have a discard during my opponent's turn because I don't really want this card in my hand. This card doesn't really do anything. You can summon it out of your hand with the Protector, but since we don't have access to this one, it doesn't matter overly that much. But at this moment, I felt like this was the best play. During the end phase, we now activate the effect of the stone in our graveyard. We summon Blue Eyes White Dragon, and this is for a very specific reason, because we have a way of getting Jet Dragon into the graveyard, and Jet Dragon needs a Blue Eyes White Dragon on board or in the graveyard, so it's quite important that we actually do this. Technically, we still have Successor Soul, another card that can actually summon Blue Eyes White Dragon from our deck, and it's kind of risky not having that many in deck, because you have some effects that kind of want to be summoning from deck as well. It is what it is in the end. We do need the setup. So what we have for our opponent's turn: one way of adding protection to our board and possibly not get run over by them, one way of dealing with one of their face-up cards on board, usually a monster, but technically field spells and stuff like this, continuous spells, if they're very, very strong, you can also disrupt them by destroying them, because it's for continuous spells and field spells, it doesn't have to be negate, they still have to be on field to resolve the effect. It's not like monster effects, if you banish them while they resolve the effect, that doesn't count as a negate, the effect still goes through. Something to keep in mind if you're relatively new to the game. If not, then you obviously will know these kind of things. That's why Mystical Space Typhoon isn't a negate unless it technically can be. It doesn't count as a negate obviously, but if you use it on a continuous spell that activates the effect, then it can basically achieve kind of the same thing. And so 2 disruptions and one way of maybe not getting run over instantly by the opponent. Another way of not getting instantly run over by the opponent, Linkuriboh as well. So we have that, and we can flood the board with at least 2 more monsters with Successor Soul and with the Jet Dragon in the graveyard if stuff is getting destroyed, which none of our spell traps do, but the opponent has to destroy something if they actually want to get rid of our board or actually finish the game. So there's that. They play the plant deck Sylvans, they use effects, it's fine. At this point I didn't really care too much about what they were doing. They didn't hit a monster. Now they go into their Link monster, the new Link monster actually, which is quite strong. It's not a bad card at all, and they will be hitting some cards which they can now send to the graveyard and actually do things with. They decided to special summon 1 and send these 2 to the graveyard. They get effects when they're in the graveyard. I think we're about to lose the Blue Eyes White Dragon here, and they trigger the effect of this card in hand, because if a Sylvan monster is sent to the graveyard, then you can special summon this from hand. That can be very, very annoying. Blue Eyes White Dragon says goodbye. Also not the best thing. Now what I decided to do here, and not sure if this is the right play or not, but I decided to get rid of Spore because it's a tuner monster, and I didn't want them to have access to a level 8 synchro, because level 8 synchros, this is something, if you're a new player, if you see your opponent might have access to level 8 synchros, this is something where your alarm bells should be ringing a little bit, and you sometimes might want to interject here. Obviously, dealing with trap cards and stuff, it can be hard for a beginner because you usually don't really know what opponent's decks do. And if you don't know what their deck aims to do, you don't know where to activate your things. But one thing that's mainly almost always bad is don't instantly use all your trap cards on the very first thing they do, unless it looks like it could be an important thing to keep them off of. And I thought it might be important to keep them off of their tuner. I knew I still had some way of dealing with like a Link monster that comes up because they do have more cards on board. And I also still had this one, so I felt like this was fine. I thought getting rid of this one because this actually has a graveyard effect, so banishing it would also not be completely awful, and discarding my dragon to the graveyard, not too bad. But they also have this card, and this card also has an effect. It can excavate the top card of your deck, and if it's a plant monster, which it was, and guess what it was? It actually was a level 1 tuner monster that they can special summon. How unlucky. And they still get access to their level 8 synchro monster, which is amazing. I think this card is banned in the TCG if I'm not mistaken, because you can basically just mill 5 cards, and in certain decks where graveyard effects are very important, this effect by itself is already crazy enough. And if you have a light and a dark monster in your graveyard, you can banish them and summon this card from your graveyard. So this card, amazing. It's absolutely crazy what this card can do. They don't actually get rid of that many cards. Nothing really that is too important. They mill 1 card that does stuff in the graveyard. So we were somewhat lucky, but I guess that is if you play Sylvans in a 60 card variant, you might not always hit the cards that you want to be hitting off of this. They go into Princess Bride here, and this is where I thought, oh, let's get rid of this. They already used their normal summon. They already used lots of the graveyard effects. The card that they just added, they can't really use in hand. If they use this effect, they could get advantage of this and keep playing. And I thought, if I get rid of this now, then they might have to stop at this, and then I can just use my Majesty on this one, and then they would only get rid of Linkuriboh, and then I can summon Jet Dragon back, and I did have stuff for the next turn. I had to have another blue-eyes monster on board, and that would be enough at this point. So I thought, if I get rid of this and it actually stops their plays, this might be nice. So we actually, oh, well, we lose Linkuriboh. The annoying thing is they do have Called by the Grave here, which if they would have waited a bit would have been a lot more beneficial to them because of Majesties. But at this point they thought, let's get rid of one of the blue eyes monsters. I don't know why they used it here. Like, there was no reason to actually use this whatsoever. I would have understood if they kind of got rid of Linkuriboh because it can come back, but even at this point didn't really make much sense to do so. Now they declare an attack like I thought. They didn't have much else they can be doing, and now I send to the graveyard. Jet Dragon doesn't really do much during my turn, but I can get it by crashing into this card during their turn and then technically get Jet Dragon on board, which is also not too bad. We also have one Maiden with Eyes of Blue, so this is quite nice for going into other plays that shut down their graveyard effect, at least one of them, which is important against the deck that has graveyard stuff. We actually get Jet Dragon out because we crashed our monster into theirs. Jet Dragon then gets rid of this one. I could have activated the effect of Jet Dragon here, but I thought maybe they only have one in the extra deck, and giving it back to them would just give them access to it again. I don't know how cramped the extra deck was, but I thought maybe let's keep them off of it rather than giving it back to them and actually let them do the whole combo again. And what I decided to do in the main phase 2 is actually summon the Maiden, use it as a synchro material because it's a level 1 tuner, and this is a level 9 synchro, and also a blue eyes Jet Dragon's effect in graveyard is still quite nice, so if a monster on our field gets destroyed, we still at least get Jet Dragon back. That can be quite interesting, and this card shuts down opponents, well, first of all effects that special summon 2 or more monsters, which for example a Link monster can do, and also shuts down at least one graveyard effect, so that's nice. And we can technically tag out, although it's not that important without the Azure Eyes or something else that you can go into. That is very important. They know they don't have graveyard effects. They don't want to be going into anything else at this point because they also know they can't get the Sylvan monster off, so they just want to stall maybe till they draw into something crazy, or it's one of those cards that if it gets destroyed it has some crazy effect. This is also something to keep in mind sometimes. We draw into one more stone. We can actually summon the stone and technically go into Linkuriboh. It was one of these cards. If this card is flipped face up, which it is right now, you can choose a number from 1 to 5, then excavate that many cards on the top of your deck and send any plant type monster to the graveyard. Also very, very strong effect. Usually doesn't go off that much because usually that's not what happens, but they do mill quite a lot of plant monsters at that point, but none that really do all that much in the graveyard. Only one of them does, and we can negate this effect, so they actually do nothing with this effect, which is quite nice for us. Then we can go in for 600 more damage, not too crazy, and actually we can trigger, because we destroyed one monster on their board, we can trigger our Jet Dragon, so we had 3,600 points. We would still lock down the graveyard a bit, and from that point onwards we would have kind of resource outgrinded them, because we could have gone into, technically if we had another synchro, which we do, like Cloudcastle or the Giant, then this card would have been sent to the graveyard. We could have special summoned another blue eyes monster from our deck, and so on and so on and so on. So we were at a point where we would have been able to keep up this for them hard board. Obviously, against some decks, this would be nothing. It would be easy to deal with, but for their deck, that wasn't the case. Also, this replay kind of showed off how you sometimes have to make decisions on when to use your trap cards and when not to use them possibly. The next replay is going to be something a bit special. It's going to be Blue Ice's very, very own rival. So this one is actually against the one and only wizard that Yugi uses, obviously, the Dark Magician. And I have to say right here, in terms of budget value, Dark Magician are 10 times better than Blue Eyes, just because of the fact that Konami decided, hey, let's give one of them a structure deck. So with just 1,500 gems, you can play a fairly competitive Dark Magician deck in comparison to what with 4 ultra rares and like 9 super rares you can play with Blue Eyes. It's not even comparable at all. The opponent will be misplaying like at one stage, I think. So it's, well, I want to say it's not the best representation, but obviously you will be misplaying as well. And most people do misplay because you either don't know what the opponent's deck does, or you only pay half attention, or you're not like the craziest Yu-Gi-Oh player in the first place. So if you play with this deck, you usually play it in like a maximum low mid-tier gold level, and then it's not too bad. Like, it's fine, it does enough stuff. We have a actually pretty good hand if your opponent doesn't have anything to disrupt this. They have Maxi, one of the cards you will be learning to hate if you're a new player, already hate possibly if you are a more veteran player that likes to special summon, because this card can draw your opponent cards whenever you do actually special summon. For each special summon, you can draw one. They can draw one card. So I decided here, instead of using the Sage effect to actually get 2 Blue Eyes monsters out, I did not want to be doing this because I did not want to be giving them more cards to go off of, because that's very dangerous play. The more cards your opponent has, especially if you don't know what deck they're playing, the more annoying this can be. And I kept this card in hand, so I had like 1 discard because I kind of wanted to keep the Sage in my hand for next turn. So either I could add one of the stones to my hand, or I could be using it on Maiden if Maiden was still on board, if I didn't have to fire my Torrential Tribute, and then I can discard the ultimate creature, because right now I don't have access, or I didn't want to have access to a Blue Eyes White Dragon anyway, or a Blue Eyes monster. And this card has a graveyard effect, so if you special summon a Blue Eyes, you can still set it back to your field, so I would still be getting it back, and I could discard it easily off Divine Wrath, so it's not too bad. We have 2 disruptions and 1 card technically, if you don't use Torrential Tribute, that your opponent has to be dealing with, and could potentially get you a Blue Eyes monster out of your deck as well. So we'll see what they're doing. They actually have Magician's Rod. This is one of the, I don't want to say new cards, it's not really new at all anymore. I think it's like 5 years at least, but it can get them into crazy good cards. So I thought, why not use this card here, because I know Dark Magician don't really have that many other monster effects, and getting rid of this one, not letting them get through with this, is probably one good way of using this, because I knew I won't be able to use Divine Wrath for quite some time against Dark Magician, so might as well fire this one here, discard the ultimate creature, like I said, and get them off of it. They still had more monster effects, funny enough. Usually that's not all that much the case. The new Tamaya's card, it can fusion summon, it's a very strong monster. Technically I could have fired Torrential Tribute here, but I kind of hoped they didn't have a Dark Magician that they can fusion summon with, because most Dark Magician fusions require them to at least have 1 Dark Magician, and this one then is like 1 Dark Magician plus like a dragon monster or something, but it wouldn't work with like just a spellcaster. It just has to be Dark Magician at that point. So I thought maybe they don't have Dark Magician in their hand. I mean, usually you don't play sometimes you play 3, sometimes you play 2, and in a 40 card deck with only 2 cards remaining in hand, it's quite likely that they don't have it and they just wanted to put a big monster on board. But let's see how this turns out. They actually have another card in this deck, and this deck is quite consistent when it comes to this, that can actually get them into Blue Eyes White, into Blue Eyes White Magician, into Dark Magician, which they did go into. They did have another way of getting it on board and using some different effect, but maybe they wanted to keep all of those copies of that card, Magician Souls, in their deck at that point, not sure. But now they actually can fusion summon, and what they fusion summon into, very, very, very annoying. It is Dark Magician, the Dragon Knight, because this card actually becomes Dark Magician on board, very, very important, and in the graveyard as well, and your opponent cannot target spell traps you control with card effects. Also, they cannot be destroyed by your opponent's card effects. So we basically have no real way of getting rid of their back row, and it becomes even more annoying. If you think, oh yeah, they only have one card in hand, that surely isn't something annoying. No, it is a card that basically searches them any spell trap in their deck with that list Dark Magician. So very annoying, because they get in a card that can constantly bring this card and any Dark Magician back from their hand or their graveyard, and the only way of stopping this loop is destroying this card, which I can't now. So yeah, and it also makes Dark Magicians on the field unaffected by my card effects. Fun. Very, very hard to get around, but they did not bother to read Maiden, or they did not care if I actually get the effect off, because they thought they have to clear this card eventually. They can't clear it like this anyway, but like this I actually can get my ultimate creature back, which can be coming in handy because it also is immune to stuff then if we need this later on in the game. Now I can actually trigger the effect again. They use their effect of this one, bring their Dark Magician back, which is, well, doesn't really matter too much for us. They technically could have waited, but they also now can recycle their stuff and can actually add Magician's Rod back to their hand, so they can use it again next turn because I don't have a negate for this one again, and then they can keep on using resources. I use the effect of this one because I sent the Sage to the graveyard. Now I can add Sage back for the next turn. I can actually go into the rank, the level 9 Synchro after in the main phase 2, because right now I want to keep these heavy hitters on board as well. Now I wanted to get rid of this card. I thought maybe it works, but it doesn't, because this card has a very annoying line. Every Dark Magician in your monster zone is unaffected by your opponent's card effects. Yeah, and I couldn't also get rid of this card because I would have to target Eternal Soul, and I can't target Eternal Soul because this one, so crashing into it made the most sense. I thought if they, I'd rather have this card in the graveyard than this, because I can actually get this one back. In the end, it doesn't really matter too much. We attack for some damage, actually get them down to quite an okay level, and then go into Blue Eyes Spirit Dragon, because they still don't really have a way of getting over this with 3000 defense points. I have a way of protecting it. The effect of negating stuff in the graveyard can come up because they have another Soul Servant with the graveyard effect, so we actually needed this negate, and then we're somewhat set for the next turn. We can protect our card from our own Torrential Tribute if you want to, and then the way of getting rid of this card is somewhat getting into the Spirit of White, I think, and while they don't have access to this card on board, because then we can actually banish this and hopefully break the loop. And because it wasn't hard enough yet, we actually have to deal with Secret Village of the Spellcasters as well. If only you control a spellcaster monster, your opponent cannot activate spell cards. Well, that's fun. We don't have any spell cards right now, but this deck runs a fair amount of spells, so could be annoying. The only thing to keep in mind, this one isn't a spellcaster monster, so if you only control this, the effect doesn't apply. And to become even worse, they can search with Magician's Rod, and they search this one, which every time they summon a Dark Magician, then they can banish one card on my field. Yeah, very, very strong, very, very annoying, and very hard to get out of this. Shut down their graveyard effect here, and now they can go into the whole combo. They have now the protection life again. Now they can banish the card because they summoned Dark Magician. They actually went for this one to get rid of this, fair enough, but they knew I had the protection on board, so it didn't really overly matter, but at least they got rid of that protection now. I think they wanted to, either didn't read this card's effect or wanted to see what happens, because this is unaffected by my card's effect and my card is unaffected by their stuff and can't be destroyed by battle, and so on and so on. So this was a bit of a, yeah, nothing happens situation. Anyway, we draw into what, of course, a spell card. Now that we can't use them, very upsetting. Technically, we could easily like attack over this and then have our spell card live. Problem is, then they can just activate Eternal Soul instantly during the battle phase before we even destroy this one and summon Dark Magician back, and then we are at the same place as we were before. We will still be doing that because there's not much else we can be doing. I kind of wanted them to use the effect because now I have Sage in my hand, and Sage can actually get out Spirit of White. And the thing is, technically, if I can get rid of this card now somehow, then I have, well, then I have the ability to actually banish this card, and there is a way of getting rid of some stuff. They actually decided to go for the back row, which is somewhat good for them because only those two are protected in the end. It is a bit like that because now I can get Jet Dragon off, which they might not have thought about, but now with Jet Dragon I can actually go into this one, destroy it, and now their back row isn't protected anymore. So using Sage on this to actually go into Dragon Spirit of Light and get rid of this one. And with this card being, leaving the field, it destroys the whole board. So they're on 2 cards that they can't really use at the moment, unless they draw into some very, very good card. And what happens, they obviously draw into some very, very good cards. And now they can basically special summon 1 Dark Magician back with the effect of this card, send 1 to the graveyard, and then special summon it back from the graveyard. They special summon this one back, and now they can trigger the effect of this card and can actually banish either this or this, depending on what they choose. It doesn't really matter. If they just choose to do this, I can send this to the graveyard, and if they choose to do this, I can also use the effect of this and do the exact same combo. So it doesn't really matter, because I now can get rid of this card as well, because it's not protected by the trap card anymore, and actually have a blue-eyes monster on board, so we don't lose out on stuff. They look like they're quite low on things. If we drew any other kind of card that would have put any blue-eyes monster on our board, any additional one, then we would have won the game already here. Sadly, we did not. We drew a card that against Dark Magician does quite little, depending on what they draw next. Will they have any good card? And I think they did have another good card, which is very annoying, and you'll see that in a second. An old friend is gonna come back. Obviously, start battle phase. Let's see if we can do things. And there is Eternal Soul. Yay, fun. They instantly get to use this one again. Doesn't matter, they can get rid of this, but it's problematic. They made a mistake here though. They forgot about our card in the graveyard. So we have already won here. Think about it for a second, but you will see, because if they get rid of this one here, then what can we do? Oh yeah, we can crash into this. We can get Jet Dragon back, and we can actually attack directly and finish the game, which very, 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 very important here. Because if they would have banished our blue-eyes monster, then we would have basically just lost the game, because there's no way we could have beaten this resource loop a second time with what we drew as well for turn. Like, Abyss Dragon did not help us at all, but since they did forget about our Jet Dragon in graveyard, well, it is what it is. They couldn't do anything about it, and we did run away with it. So Kaiba wins again. Yes, obviously money rules, even if it's a budget build. Hope you enjoyed the replays, the deck profile. Leave a like, comment, subscribe, but most importantly, I hope you have a nice day.